Let's now move on to the third of the Porter forces, which determines how attractive an industry is for an investor, for a firm to invest in. The third force is the existence of substitutes. This is a very interesting force. This is a force which varies over time. For instance, if you look at the ordinary cinema theatres which used to flourish across India, right, some years back, you find that most of them have either closed down or been converted into marriage halls. Now, what is really the reason? The primary reason is that an alternative means of satisfying the same need has come about through the video industry, right? Sitting at home, you can watch a movie. You have home theaters which reproduce the same experience, right? So you don't really need to go to an ordinary cinema theater, and therefore ordinary cinema theaters have slowly dwindled. The cinema theater is no longer an attractive industry to invest in because there are substitutes. On the other hand, if you look at multiplexes, right? Multiplexes are very attractive because multiplexes satisfy several needs, and multiplexes don't really have a substitute. Multiplexes in India you will find on particularly during the holidays or on the weekends, you would find hordes of parents with children who've come there. It's more like a picnic spot, right? So it serves not just the need of seeing a movie, it serves the need of shopping, it serves the need of being a place where you are entertained, it serves the need for eating. Therefore, a multiplex is different. The market for a multiplex, the multiplex industry, is an attractive industry, whereas the old cinema industry is no longer an attractive industry. Substitutes determine industry attractiveness. If substitutes exist for that particular product, the industry is less attractive. Now, the fourth Porter force is the bargaining power of buyers. At a common sense level, it makes sense. After all, if you take an industry and in that industry, the buyer of the industry has a lot of bargaining power. If the buyer of the industry is a powerful buyer, if that industry only has those kind of buyers, obviously that industry is not an attractive industry to get into. On the other hand, if you had an industry where the buyers are weak and the buyers had low bargaining power in that particular industry, then that industry is a good industry for a firm to get into. Let's see what are the factors that contribute to the bargaining power of buyers, right? One of the factors is the proportion of product bought. Obviously, if the industry is such that the buyer buys a large proportion of the product made by the firm, then clearly the buyer has a lot of bargaining power, right? On the other hand, if the industry is such that in most cases the typical buyer buys a very small portion of what the firm makes, in that case the bargaining power of the buyer is limited. What about the potential for backward integration? That's the next point, right, which gives rise to bargaining power of buyers. An industry is selling to a buyer if the buyer has the capacity to take over the industry, if the buyer has the capacity to do what the industry does himself, then clearly the buyer has great bargaining power over the industry. The third point is how many alternate suppliers are there. You have an industry where there are only few firms in that industry. The nature of the industry is such that there are only few firms in the industry. Then the buyer of the industry, buyer of that particular industry, has low bargaining power because there are few suppliers open to him. Connected with this is the issue of switching costs, which is the fourth point. What are switching costs? As a buyer, if you had to change from one firm to another firm, and if you could do that easily, right, then your switching cost is low. As a buyer, if it was difficult for you to switch from one firm to another, then your switching cost is high. Industries where buyers have low switching costs are not attractive because buyers can quickly change from one firm to another. Industries where buyers have high switching costs are attractive because buyers will find it difficult to switch from one firm to the other. The last point under force 4 is the importance of the product to the buyer. Clearly, if you have a situation where the buyer requires the product which that industry is making very badly, definitely the bargaining power of the buyer is low. On the other hand, if the product which that industry is making for the typical buyer of that industry is such that it does not really make a big difference to the buyer, in this event the buyer has huge bargaining power because the product is not very important to him.